This is perhaps the most famous image in history. Millions of people cross the world every year to visit it, but very few look at the painting directly. Most stare instead into their camera phones, or use their precious seconds with the Mona Lisa to photograph themselves. Why do we feel compelled to do this? The answer, I think, lies in a revolution in visual culture that has turned us into a population of image addicts. We now take more photographs every minute than were made in the entire 19th century, and spend an average of 6 hours a day gazing into screens. It's what you're doing right now. Every age is said to have its genius. The 18th century is often called the age of philosophy. The 19th century is the age of the novel. But our own age is undoubtedly an age of the image. Other periods had images, of course, but in the last 100 years or so, we made more images than ever before. And they have changed not just what we see, but how we see. This was an era that rewrote the rules of image making, beaming pictures into our homes.
This is the BBC television station at Alexandra Palace.
Manipulating them. Making the impossible visible. And in the digital age, revealing them in eye-opening detail. In these programmes, I want to ask a series of questions. Why do images give us such pleasure? How do we make sense of them? Where do they get their power? And ultimately, can we trust them? I'd like to start with a painting. A still life made by Paul Cézanne in the 1890s. Look at it. Look at it closely. At first sight, it seems perfectly conventional, but it's actually profoundly odd. The floor tilts up at an angle. The table's edges bend and blur. The shadows make no sense. And in the background, an apple the size of a bowling ball looks as if it's just about to fall. This is a still life that isn't still at all. There are, I think, only two explanations. The first is that Cézanne wasn't a very good painter. The second is that he was up to something. Now, I believe it was the latter. I think Cézanne was trying to represent something that few had even attempted before. He wasn't only painting 2 dimensions or even 3 dimensions. He was trying to represent the 4th dimension, time. After all, in the time it took him to paint these objects, his head moved, the light shifted. He walked around the objects and saw them from different angles. Cézanne had seen, even in this, in the stillest thing he could think of, a world in perpetual motion. I see Cézanne's clumsy masterpiece as the beginning of a new visual age. An era of unprecedented speed and change, where traditions expired, certainties dissolved, and solid ground seemed to crumble beneath one's feet. What was an image maker to do? Some, like Cézanne, overturned an old medium.
I don't know if I should do this, but I'm going to just do it anyway.
But others invented a new one. As Paul Cézanne was painting his collapsing still life, across the Atlantic in America, a perspiring genius was hard at work. In the 1890s, Thomas Edison was also trying to capture time and movement in still images. Edison and his assistant William Dixon developed a motorized camera to record such motion, and their decisive innovation was this: celluloid film with these sprocket holes running all the way down it. Now, the gears of the camera, which were based on those of a clock, would pull the celluloid past the lens, exposing each frame in turn. Photograph, move, and so on, up to 40 times a second. Now, it's no exaggeration to say that this helped give birth to cinema as we know it. Film, a little bit like this, became industry standard and remained so for the best part of a century. Watched back in one of Edison's kinetoscopes, the celluloid created the illusion that the photographs were moving. We may not be impressed by these grainy tableaux, but early audiences were. As they watched these quicksilver characters leap into life, they felt they were witnessing a miracle, a Victorian virtual reality that made even mundane events magical. Has a sneeze ever looked this heroic? In some respects, Edison was doing the same thing as Paul Cézanne. Both of them were trying to capture time and movement through images. But while Cézanne was attempting to compress the experience of elapsing time into a single painted image, Edison was using many different images, dozens in fact every second. In the 1890s, the new medium of cinema spread like wildfire. Some called it the seventh art, and the only one that truly united space and time. But many filmmakers still relied on established art forms. This film, by the Lumière brothers, uncannily resembles the work of Paul Cézanne. The Lumières projected their motion pictures onto large screens that excited and sometimes terrified their audiences, creating the dominant visual medium of our age. Over the next century, films became bigger.
Nothing like it has ever been seen before.
And more immersive, transporting viewers out of time and space and into worlds that often defied the laws of physics. In the process, they created a society infatuated with looking and seduced by spectacle. But in this pathologically visual age, the public weren't only watching pictures. One of the defining features of our age is the democratization of image making. Modern technology has made it possible for pretty much everyone to make their own photographs and even their own videos. Last year, we took more than 1 trillion photographs, documenting every aspect of our lives, from the important to the less important. Photography is no longer just a pastime. We now need it to make sense of the world, to make our experiences meaningful. This striking phenomenon might seem to be a product of our own generation, but it actually began in Cézanne and Edison's lifetime. when an American company called Kodak released a new product. The Brownie was one of the first point-and-shoot cameras. An absurdly basic piece of technology that when it first went on sale in 1900 cost just $1 a unit. But it was a game changer. Cheap, portable and easy to use, the Brownie brought photography to millions and changed it in the process. As those stiff, stern portraits of the Victorian era were superseded by informal snapshots of people looking relaxed, even happy. In my opinion, the first great master of the snapshot aesthetic was not only an amateur, but a child. Jacques-Henri Lartigue was given his first camera at the age of 7. A year later, he received a Brownie Model 2. He soon succumbed to the pleasure of image making.
J'étais un petit garçon très petit et j'ai fait des photos. Ces photos, je les faisais par passion de conserver les images de la vie qui passe.
Like his contemporaries Cézanne and Edison, Lartigue was obsessed with time.
C'est plus qu'une aide-mémoire, c'est comme une espèce de manie d'attraper le temps qui passe.
Lartigue's photographs were intimate objects. He kept them in private albums, which weren't discovered until the 1960s. Photographs aren't only images. They can also be things that have a weight, a texture, even a smell. Lartigue treasured them like they were relics, as if they were the past condensed into physical form. As I leaf through his personal albums, it feels like I'm touching his memories. Lartigue fell in love with the velocity of modernity. But he found a way to stop this whirling world in its tracks and frame it with almost supernatural perfection. The attenuated shadow of a tennis player. The eternal space between beach and ball. The gravity-defying gravel that will never fall back to earth. Every one of Lartigue's photographs is a monochrome miracle, a reminder of the beauty that hides in plain sight. These photographs are brimming with love and fun and mischief. You almost feel that if you get close enough, you can hear Lartigue's subjects giggling. And this has to be my favourite of the bunch. Lartigue took it in 1904 in his parents' house in Paris, and it's a self-portrait. It shows Lartigue himself sitting in the bath. He floated his little camera on a board in the water, set the focus and exposure, and then apparently asked his mother to come in and press the shutter release. But for me, the best thing about this photograph is his face. We are looking at a new kind of image maker and a new kind of image. In our infinitely interconnected world, the appallingly named selfie has become a global phenomenon. 110 years after Lartigue floated his camera in the bath, Ellen DeGeneres took a selfie with the world's most famous people. They too struggled to position their camera, and they too were delighted when they finally succeeded. Ellen then posted the image online, where it was retweeted 3 million times within just hours. What a difference a century makes. From the intensely private to the ostentatiously public, today's vanity-fueled selfie industry seems a far cry from the innocence of Lartigue's childhood snap. But it too shares the pleasure of a moment captured. Revolutions tend to come in clusters. As amateurs like Lartigue were reinventing photography, scientists and engineers were redefining the laws of physics. But they too changed visual culture. In 1895, the German physicist Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen created the first X-ray of his wife's hand, replete with wedding ring. Humans could look through their bodies for the first time. In 1903, Orville and Wilbur Wright achieved the first engine-powered flight. As people ascended into the ether, they saw the world from a new perspective. Three-dimensional space collapsed before their eyes, making the world more abstract than ever before. Giving birth to a viewpoint which, in our age of drones and satellites, is all too familiar. But the most fundamental breakthrough came in 1905 with Albert Einstein's special theory of relativity. Before Einstein, most people understood the world as having three spatial dimensions, with time being entirely separate and unchanging. Einstein, however, argued that everything was related to and relative to everything else. So space could be bent by mass, light could be bent by space, time could be stretched by gravity, and if you moved exceptionally fast, you could even slow down time. In Einstein's formulation, space and time were woven together into a four-dimensional matrix often known as space-time. As these innovations percolated through society, they altered its images. From about 1908, Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, who compared themselves to the Flying Wright brothers, began painting landscapes from what looks like an aviator's perspective. Portraits that pierced their sitters' bodies like X-rays. And still lifes that shared the roving eye of motion picture cameras. Their paintings, like Cézanne's, are woven from the four-dimensional matrix of space-time. Much of this was surely unconscious. Few people understood Einstein's theories at the time, just as they don't today. Even Thomas Edison, the man who helped invent modern cinema, struggled to make sense of it.
What do you think of the Einstein theory?
I don't think anything of Einstein theory because I can't understand it.
But artists and filmmakers did seem to understand that these unprecedented times demanded unprecedented images. And the most rhapsodic apostle of modernity came not from France or Britain or the United States, but from Italy. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti was a poet, propagandist and motor mouth who called himself the caffeine of Europe. In 1909, he published his Futurist Manifesto. inspired, as one is, by a car accident. "Come, my friends," I said, "let us go." We went up to the 3 snorting machines. A great sweep of madness drove us through the streets. We hunted like young lions. Death, tamed, went in front of me at each corner, offering me his hand. Suddenly, there were 2 cyclists. What a bore. Pwah! I stopped short and in disgust hurled myself blam, head over heels, in a ditch. Marinetti claimed that that car crash kick-started a new cultural movement, one that rejected the past and all its traditions, embraced danger in all its forms, and celebrated a new kind of beauty, the beauty of speed. Futurist artists portrayed the dematerializing dynamism of modern life. A dachshund being walked in the street. A musician's hand dancing across his violin. A motorcar so fast that it is no longer even visible. But perhaps the preeminent futurist masterpiece is this: Unique Forms of Continuity in Space by Umberto Boccioni. It's one of the oldest ideas in all of sculpture, the full-length, freestanding male figure. But here, that figure is striding so powerfully and so quickly that it dissolves into a blur of limbs. The muscles become like the pistons on a great machine. The wind turns the flapping clothes into flames. The result is a kind of bionic person. 1 part flesh, 1 part metal, 1 part human, 1 part projectile. This piece is essentially 4-dimensional. It illustrates the way that time and space and matter collide with each other, the way that a moving figure hacks its way through its surroundings. It is an embodiment of a brave new world, a world that was marching towards a more dynamic and exhilarating future. Boccioni's metallic man was uncannily prescient. A year later, Europe marched into war, turning men into futurist machines. The futurists raced to the battlefront with glee. This was far more exciting than a car crash. But not all of them returned. In August 1916, Umberto Boccioni was thrown from his horse during a cavalry exercise and trampled to death. He was 33 years old. The First World War brought together many of the inventions of the previous 2 decades. There were planes flying back and forth over the battlefields. There were speeding motor cars behind the lines. There were periscopes and telescopes and surveillance towers and reconnaissance patrols. And there were portable cameras. Many soldiers went to war with box brownies in their possession. I think our image of that war was profoundly shaped by a photographer most people haven't heard of. Frank Hurley was born in Sydney in 1885. He ran away from home at the age of 13 and bought a box brownie at 17.
I had spent my teenage life in the steelworks. I was a good mechanic, and I had turned my hobby, photography, into my profession.
In 1914, he became the official photographer on Ernest Shackleton's expedition to the Antarctic, taking pictures so vivid that they almost bring on frostbite. Hurley was fearless to the point of insanity, more than happy to risk his life for the perfect photograph. He was also a crude, rude and violent character. He is Australian, wrote one of his British colleagues. Very Australian. He finally made it to the Western Front in 1917, where he took a series of unforgettable photographs. But he found it so difficult to capture the actual fighting that occasionally he took some liberties. While Hurley was in Passchendaele in 1917, he took lots of photographs of different incidents at different times and places. But occasionally, he combined these images together to produce some dramatic composite photographs. And this is just one example. This is a photograph of some men going over the top. Now, I'm pretty sure it's not genuine. The conditions at Passchendaele were wet and muddy, and this photograph seems like it was taken in dry and sunny conditions. But that didn't bother Hurley. He then took another photograph of the same men, taken just a few seconds later, and placed it next to the original photograph, so it looked like there were two banks of men going over the top. Hurley was just getting started. He had another photograph of a dogfight, and he put that photograph above the men, so it looked like there was an aerial battle taking place above them. The rest of the sky was pretty blank, so he found some clouds, but Hurley still felt more was necessary. So he found another photograph of a crashed plane, and he placed that at the right edge of the image. It's looking pretty dramatic, but Hurley was going to add some more explosions because more explosions are always exciting, and he placed those right here in the middle of the picture. So it looked like these men were in the middle of an absolutely tumultuous battle, when of course all of it was a fantasy. Hurley's finished image was compiled from multiple negatives. But for him, this was a lie that told a bigger truth about the drama and tragedy of war. Hurley's darkroom manipulation prefigured a growing problem. As people mastered the art of making images, they mastered the art of tampering with them. Working with scalpels, then pixels, until it became almost impossible to distinguish the real from the unreal. But like their high-tech successors, Hurley's photographs had undeniable impact. In the 100 years since they were taken, they inspired paintings, film sets, and poster designers, making the First World War unimaginable without them. When we see the conflict, we see it through Hurley's eyes. When the war finally ended, Europe's scientists got back to work. On the 6th of November 1919, a group of them hurried to Burlington House in London. They had come to hear the findings of a major expedition led by the British astronomer Arthur Eddington. Eddington was convinced that Einstein's theory of relativity was correct, and on the 29th of May he had travelled to a remote West African island to prove it, by photographing a complete solar eclipse. Einstein had predicted that a massive object like the Sun would bend space and therefore light. If Einstein was wrong, the eclipse wouldn't change the position of the stars around the Sun. But if he was right, the light from those stars would be bent and their position would appear very fractionally to have moved. The Royal Astronomical Society owns some early copies of Eddington's original photographs, positive images printed onto glass plates. People often think of science and art as being different, even opposite endeavours, but this photograph is among the most artful I've seen in a long, long time. It has a simplicity and a clarity that is just exquisite, and it repays close inspection. Down here there is a huge solar prominence, perhaps 300,000 or 400,000 kilometres long, that has been captured at the very moment it leaps off the surface of the Sun. It is almost like a Lartigue freeze frame, only on cosmic scale. But its scientific value far outweighs its aesthetic value. You can just make out, in the darkness of space, some stars. Now, Eddington and his team compared the position of those spots of light with another photograph of the same spot without the Sun, and they found that they had indeed been bent by just a few thousandths of a degree by the gravitational force of the Sun. And in doing so, they helped confirm that Einstein's theory of relativity was correct. These photographs catapulted Einstein to fame, and his own photo emblazoned the front pages of newspapers all over the world. It did so in part thanks to another crucial innovation in visual culture. In the 19th century, most newspapers and magazines didn't contain many photographs, but towards the end of the century, a new method was invented. The halftone process converted photographs into thousands of different sized dots, which made them cheaper and easier to print than ever before. And by 1919, newspapers and magazines were full of photographs. The halftone process transformed the fabric of people's lives, bringing countless images into the public's homes and hands every single day, fueling their voracious visual appetites. And even in our computerized age, its legacy continues. Those half-tone dots being the prototype for digital pixels. Back in 1919, the half-tone process splashed Einstein's face across the front page of a prominent German newspaper that was read by many Berliners. None was more impressed than a young artist called Hannah Höch. In 1919, Höch was working at the largest publishing house in Berlin, the very firm that published that famous portrait of Einstein. She couldn't fail to be inspired by the imagery around her. In 1918, she started to leaf through the many publications that were lying around her office and cut out any image that interested her. She would then stick them next to other images to create striking, amusing, unsettling juxtapositions. And she called her method photomontage. Höch had created a new visual language, and she used it to shock and unsettle her audience. She distorted and disfigured her subjects, creating disjointed elusive narratives that condemn the dysfunctional politics of Weimar Germany and the objectification of its women. Herck's first major work was the concisely titled Cut with the Kitchen Knife Dada Through the Last Weimar Beer Belly Cultural Epoch of Germany. This piece was made in the winter of 1919, a tumultuous period in German history. There was inflation, there were food shortages, there were recriminations and assassinations, there were communist uprisings and nationalist uprisings. It was, quite frankly, chaos. And so too is this image. And at first sight, it is so busy and so complicated that it doesn't make any sense at all. But there was method in this madness. The top right corner, this contains the German establishment, the so-called Beer Belly Brigade. And at the heart of that zone is the heart of the establishment, the Kaiser himself, Kaiser Wilhelm II, whose right eye has been replaced with a baby and his moustache has become the legs of a wrestler. Now, this whole top right zone is a very masculine zone. There are government ministers, there are top hats and bowler hats, there are machines and cogs and wheels. There are aeroplanes, which of course excited men so much in this period. And there are, of course, guns. I see this zone as a searing indictment of masculinity, saying, men, you got us into this mess. Then, if we travel to the bottom half of the image, we see the female side of the story. So down here, this is a map of all the countries in Europe who had already given women the vote or were about to give women the vote. Germany had done it that very year in 1919. And just at the top left of it is a small, almost invisible, faded black and white photograph of Hannah herself. And I wonder if she's saying that women are going to bring about the revolution that Germany so desperately needs. There are, of course, other revolutionaries here. There is Karl Marx and there is Lenin. But over here is perhaps the greatest revolutionary of them all. He's got the biggest face in the entire picture. That is Albert Einstein. She obtained that photograph from the Berlin newspaper that was published by her own company shortly after the theory of relativity was verified. Just as he was ripping apart traditional understandings of physical reality, so she was ripping apart, quite literally, traditional understandings of image making. Hannah Herck's photomontages created an aesthetic that never went out of fashion. Her disruptive imagery went on to inspire many artists and graphic designers, and was famously appropriated by satirists and comedians. But above all, her works captured the mayhem of their own times. Other modernist art forms were doing the same thing. The fragmented poetry of T.S. Eliot.
April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land.
The spiky music of Igor Stravinsky. And the frenetic films of Sergei Eisenstein. All of them characterized by confusion, rupture, and discontinuity. But on the other side of the Atlantic, other image makers were trying to impose some order. Since Edison's pioneering work of the 1890s, the American cinema industry had grown rapidly. In the 1910s, many filmmakers relocated their productions from New York and New Jersey to California.
A little more bite, a little less spark, a little less fight, a little more spark. Close your mouth and open up your heart and baby satisfy me.
They had several reasons for moving here. First, sunshine was bright and reliable enough for year-round filmmaking. Second, the landscapes of Southern California were extraordinarily varied. There were mountains and forests and deserts and beaches, which meant a huge variety of locations could all be simulated within easy reach of Los Angeles. Third, land was cheap, so vast studio complexes could be built much more affordably than on the East Coast. And fourth, this was pretty much as far away as they could get from Thomas Edison's lawyers, who were hunting down anyone who infringed his patents.
Out where they say, let us be gay, I'm going Hollywood.
Studios started to appear in a small suburb of Los Angeles called Hollywood. Universal Studios opened in 1912, Fox in 1915, and the Warner Brothers released their first film in 1980. By the end of the war, American filmmakers led the world and created a profoundly influential style. Cinema, remember, was still a novel art form where time and space could be manipulated through editing. For audiences more used to theatre, this intercutting of different shots could be confusing. To get around these problems and to clear up these confusions, Hollywood directors developed a series of editing techniques. Their goal was simple: to make all of their shots look like they belong to a single and seamless flow of events that would be immediately comprehensible to their audiences. The method was known as the continuity system. Let's see how it worked. Filmmakers typically began with an establishing shot, so an audience could understand where they were. Then they cut to a mid-shot to draw attention to the main character. They invented the close-up, so viewers could see what that character was thinking. Reverse shots revealed what he had seen. Directors learned to keep characters' positions and poses consistent to avoid confusion. And when filming conversations, they increasingly obeyed the 180-degree rule. Always keep the camera on one side of the speakers. If you don't, it will make them look like they're talking to themselves. Why do I find this so exciting? Well, it's because these pioneering filmmakers were constructing from scratch an entirely new visual language, a visual style as fundamental as Renaissance perspective, a style so slick and so flawless that we don't even notice it. And like perspective, the continuity system proved hugely successful. Pretty much every film of the last 100 years, and indeed every sequence in this program, obeys its rules. But one early filmmaker turned these rules on their head. His name was Joseph Frank Keaton. Buster Keaton was born in Kansas in 1895, the same year as cinema, as X-rays, as Paul Cézanne's collapsing still life. His parents were vaudeville entertainers, and at a young age he became part of their act. The show climaxed with some child abuse. Keaton's father became so angry with his son that he picked him up and threw him across the stage so violently that some audience members even called the police. I've been in this town so long that back in the city I've been taken for a loss. After briefly serving in the First World War, Keaton entered the film business. By the early 1920s, he was making his own films, where he mastered his deadpan expression and the art of almost entirely visual comedy.
The average picture used 240 titles. That was about the average. And the most I ever used was 56. We eliminated subtitles just as fast as we could if we could possibly tell it in action.
His notorious stunts were often performed at great personal risk. This one broke his neck. But ever the professional, he completed the take. Keaton's gags were meticulously planned and rehearsed. They relied on the perfect alignment of time and space, all 4 dimensions. And some of them are so exquisite that they can be watched again and again and again. Keaton's finest film, in my view, is Sherlock Jr., made in 1924. Keaton plays a movie-loving cinema projectionist who yearns to be a detective like those on the silver screen. One evening, he is projecting a film. But before long, he falls asleep. And into a dream. He collects his hat and walks into the auditorium. And then something unprecedented happens. Keaton climbs onto the stage and leaps into the film itself. What happens next is breathtakingly original. Keaton gets trapped in the film's ever-changing shots. He has become like Umberto Boccioni's futurist sculpture, a unique form of continuity in space. That sequence is, in my view, one of the funniest in all of cinema. It's also one of the cleverest in the way that it subverts the continuity system. Editing was supposed to stitch together time and space so that films made sense. But Keaton is using editing to unravel time and space, and so to expose the illusion that is filmmaking. As Sherlock Jr. played in cinemas, a seminal art movement emerged. Surrealism erupted in Paris in 1924. Many of its members loved Buster Keaton's films. To them, nothing was more surreal. Salvador Dali even made an artwork in the filmmaker's honor, entitled The Marriage of Buster Keaton. Like Keaton, Dali tinkered with time and space. He experimented with double images, treble images, mirror images. Using traditional techniques to upend the laws of nature. But unlike Keaton, he claimed that what he was really doing was science.
Because myself believes, contrary, that the modern atomic age is very gay. No, nothing is more gay than the collision and explosion of intra-atomic conflicts of nuclear physics.
You feel that really livens things up enormously.
For me, is the more happy thing is look these terrific conflicts about electrons and pi mesons and atoms. Is everything jumping and romping in a completely extraordinary eurythmic feeling. Now, my interest is only about the tremendous progress of nuclear research and nuclear physics.
Dali's scientific interests may feature in arguably his most celebrated painting, The Persistence of Memory, made in 1931. You've probably all seen this picture before. It's one of the most recognisable images of the 20th century. Now, like all of Salvador Dali's paintings, it is a technical tour de force. Just look at the way he has painted the crepuscular light on the cliffs in the background. I don't think you'll see a finer passage of painting in modern art. It really is like looking at an old master painting, though admittedly one that's gone somewhat awry. The picture, however, is most famous for its clocks. There are 4 of them. One of them is covered in ants, and the other 3 have, it seems, melted in the intense desert sun and are now drooping rather forlornly over whatever it is they're resting on. Now, Dali claimed that his inspiration for this unforgettable motif came from watching camembert melting in the heat. So what does it mean? Well, it could depict a dream, it could be a technical exercise, it could simply be Dali's attempt to represent a hard, rigid material like metal as though it's soft. Or it could have been inspired by science, perhaps even Albert Einstein. After all, this painting represents the new relativistic vision of time, not permanent and mechanical and unchanging, but endlessly stretchy. Remember, Einstein argued that time could be bent by heavy gravitational forces like the sun. Well, that is exactly what's happening here. The sun is quite literally bending time. In the 90 years since they were painted, Dali's soft clocks have oozed their way into our collective consciousness.
Well, this is surreal.
It's now easy to forget that beneath those familiar surfaces lay some profound ideas. Here's Dali befuddling another interviewer in 1958.
The last development of nuclear physics proved that the new conception of space-time is completely flexible. This proved that this object of completely surrealistic approach of Sauvage is completely true and scientific.
Dali, I must confess, you lost me about halfway through.
Salvador Dali may have been fascinated by Albert Einstein, but he admired another scientist just as dearly. So much so that his very signature became an homage to his work.
C'est une colonne de lait, une colonne liquide basée sur la morphologie.
A scientist who had not merely bent time, but frozen it.
Introducing Dr. Harold E. Edgerton of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Harold Edgerton was an American professor of engineering who in the 1920s began experimenting with strobe lights. This is a stroboscope, or strobe. It is essentially just a flashing light, but you can adjust how quickly it flashes. Now, the extraordinary thing about strobes is they have this ability to distort time. Well, sort of. If you direct this at a very fast-moving object, it will make that object appear to slow down or even stop.
When you direct this light on a fan and synchronize the light flashes to the revolutions of the fan, the blades appear to be stationary.
Edgerton first employed stroboscopes to study the motion of engines. But in the 1930s, he started using them to make images. Synchronizing his strobe with a still camera, he produced high-speed photography exceeding anything at the time. Edgerton also connected strobes to film cameras, producing super slow-motion videos. Egerton went on to make a series of staggering images. This photograph, lasting just 1/1000th of a second, records the first flash of a nuclear bomb. But his masterpiece visualizes a much smaller explosion. For many years, Egerton was fascinated by the behavior of liquids, how they dripped, splashed and sloshed around. And in the 1930s, he rigged up a system in order to examine them. He filled a dropper with milk and then released droplets of the fluid, one after the other, onto a dish. Now, seen at normal speed, it's not particularly interesting, but if you slow it down, it becomes almost miraculous. Egerton's finest photograph captures the moment, lasting just 10,000ths of a second, when a droplet of milk plummets through the darkness onto a red dish beneath it. When it strikes the surface, it bounces upwards into 21 delicate tentacles, each crowned by a tiny jewel. The milk is transfigured into a liquid diadem, an exquisite creation invisible to the naked eye. Nowadays, we all use images to penetrate the mysteries of time and space. We can see billions of light years away. We can look down on our own planet from a God's eye perspective. We can peer inside our bodies and spy on our own children before they're even born. And we can scrutinize the building blocks of life, even though they're 1,000 times smaller than a grain of sand. These achievements are now part of everyday life, but they originated in an earlier period. In the first few decades of the 20th century, science and technology rewrote the rules of physics and irrevocably changed our perspective on the world. This revolution in time and space transformed the era's images, but it had also been transformed by them. What do Paul Cézanne, Buster Keaton and Harold Egerton have in common? Well, all of them ripped apart traditional modes of image making in order to chronicle a world that was changing at an unprecedented pace. In the process, they helped write a new visual language, changing not just what people saw, but how they saw. And this would just be the beginning. As the century unfolded and its stakes grew ever higher, images became even more powerful, used to influence, control, and even alter society. Can we really trust what we see? Explore the technology behind deepfake image manipulation and discover the cultural significance of the lens throughout history. Go to bbc.co.uk/Age of the Image and follow the links to the Open University.